If you can and you're willing to support us, please do so. We'd really appreciate it. We're trying to expand the platform, trying to pay these bills. You can go to dgutspodcast.com. That's Don't Give Up the Ship apparel, some naval pride and heritage gear you'll actually wear in public. Get shirts, hoodies, shower shoes, drawstring bags, all kinds of cool stuff. Dope stickers like these. You can get logo stickers. We got the Enlisted Deviant stuff, all kinds of cool stuff. More to come. Working on lots of designs all the time. We also have the podcast challenge coin, just came out. I'm really proud of that. And then if you also are willing to and able to, please go to patreon.com/dgutspodcast. A lot of really cool benefits, tiers, all kinds of cool stuff to try to drive support for the financial side of the platform. There's demands on all of the things that I want to do to expand, cost money, all the services and subscriptions and all those things. And I am trying to turn this thing into a business and a job so that I can do that and devote all my time to providing more content, services, whatever I can do that helps you out. So if you're willing and able, please go to dgutspodcast.com. You can also go to patreon.com/dgutspodcast and become a member today. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Don't Give Up the Ship podcast, episode 119. And today I'm bringing on retired Fleet Master Chief Paul Kingsbury for another leadership discussion. He wanted to discuss empathy, ran across an article in Forbes magazine talking about empathy being the most important leadership like tool or concept. And we kind of wanted to go down that rabbit hole and tease apart the different aspects of empathy, how it works. Is it the most important thing, and how does that look in a leadership application? And then we kind of went the inverse route of like indifference and some of those like the probably like a more of a civilian interpretation of military leadership being more like callous and detached and, you know, just suck it up and do the job kind of concept. And so we explored all those things, had a really, really great discussion. I love talking to Paul. He pushes me intellectually, and it's always a fun discussion because he's just as passionate about this stuff as me. And so you'll see this not just here, but on his Cutlass podcast platform. So I encourage you to go check it out. The Cutlass podcast. I'll have the link in the show notes as well. So you can go check it out there. He'll probably edit it a little more heavily than me. I'm just, you know me, I just shotgun blast everything out there. But yeah, so you'll see it there. You'll see it on YouTube. You'll see it all the places, but always fun talking to Paul. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Check it out. And there we go. Everybody knows who you are. Now happily retired Fleet Master Chief Paul Kingsbury. So yeah. Welcome back to the podcast universe, sir.
I know. It's good to see you, Will, and it's good to see you like virtually. You know, the anonymity or whatever that word is gone.
Oh yeah, this is the first time, since I've unmasked myself that
So how many times did I come out and I said your name on podcasts or whatever, and you're like, no.
Yeah, so. Well, and it's like, I still tell people to not use my name, but people slip. Like I did one with Toby Ruiz and the dude that Steve something, I forget. Like my brain is not even fully powered on yet because of this disrespectful hour. But it's early here on the West Coast.
Yes, especially for a retiree.
Yeah, for a retired Master Chief with a homeless beard.
Yes.
Yeah, I did one with them on like ELD stuff yesterday, which was super cool.
Awesome. But, I'm going to try to get Toby up.
Trying to bring awareness to that program, because like what's wild is they have the capacity and everything's in place, and they don't have the enrollment, which is bizarre. Yeah. And I think that just like their analysis was like people just don't know, like. One, about like a lot of the junior people don't even know that the courses are real. But then two, it's like they said, and this is kind of a gross fact, is like the enrollment for chiefs and first classes is high, and then it drops off precipitously. And it's like, oh, so the people that are concerned with promotions are going to the classes, but the people who, you know, like we're charged with caring for aren't. That's great. Yeah. Because that's what they firmly placed it at the feet of leadership, as far as like not having the enrollment and everything. But yeah, that was like those guys, like Toby slipped with my name a few times, and I'm just like, whatever. Yeah. At this point, like you can Facebook stalk me and figure it out pretty quick, so it's whatever.
Yeah. No, it's great to see you and catch up, and thanks again. So I wasn't on the lam per se, but I was heavily dialing up when I was working at the Naval Institute. I had a lot of bandwidth, and then
Yeah.
um, I found this new position with Blue Cross Blue Shield as their director of uniform service relations. So you're talking now outside of the naval services
Yeah.
into traveling countrywide at big events to
Mhm.
raise awareness of federal dental and vision. But it was consuming. But yeah, there was like I talked to one of my episodes, those villains, the kind of villains creeped in, like, oh, you don't have
Yeah.
time, or
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
started making excuses. But it's good. I'm ready to be back. And I'm inspired by you and the stuff I see you got, you doing, and other people. So I've got the bandwidth. We're done with the excuse making,
Hell yeah.
so it's time to get rolling. And I
I
read
dig it.
this article a while ago, right? This kind
Mhm.
of and as I was thinking, you do this too. You think through podcasts, and you're like, hey,
Yeah.
what's a new approach or whatever. Instead of just creating, I had been linking content to the CPO guide, and now with the
Yeah.
petty officers guide, but this nested in. But this ended up being an article. I thought from time to time, like when there's leader failures, hey, maybe we should do an episode on that and kind of let's
Mhm.
kind of do a critique. That's my new background, what I mean, kind of thing, and go, hey, what can we learn from that failure, instead of just post that dude or gal on the Navy Times and drag them through the mud. Like, there's learning
Yeah.
that comes from that. So but I came across this article in Forbes magazine. Empathy is the most important leadership skill, and really got me
Yeah.
thinking. So um, you're a guy, I definitely thought this would be a cool conversation, because I think it supports a lot of the content that you've been generating,
Yeah.
you know um,
Yeah.
So, and then you hear, like, I hear Steve Jobs, I hear Simon Sinek, I hear Brene Brown, I hear Tony Robbins, right?
Mhm.
They all are talking about this empathetic leadership style. And in my mind, I'm like, does it jive with the kind of military? So let's kind of have that discussion.
Yeah,
So,
I hate the leadership style like concept, but we can get into that.
yeah,
Yeah, the whole like this is my leadership style, and it's like it's
yeah,
not, it's a tool, man. Come on.
yeah.
Like I hate
And
that
it's situational
terminology.
leadership, right? You
Mhm.
got to be able to adjust, right? Like I know
Yeah.
I've talked about, like, hey, and I teed up a talking point about, there's going to be times when you're emotionally charged and things are happening. I don't have time to sit and pause and kind of
Right,
consider
right.
feelings, right? But how do you handle that?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to throw back with you, like, kind of like I said. So this concept of empathy, um, I know in mine, I'm always like, let's words matter, so let's define them,
Yeah.
right? So people think they know what it is, but
Right.
it's defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. So, okay, got
Mhm.
it. And I think that's important. But again, is it number
Yeah.
one skill? What does it mean? Is it inherent? Can it be learned?
Yeah.
Should you dismiss it if you're a military leader? So over to you. Like, what's your take on empathy as the
I
most important skill, and your thoughts
s-
on it?
I don't think I think they're getting close to something important when they're saying it's the most important skill, but they're not articulating it in the way that I think would be more accurate, in that like, and I don't know that I've gone down the road of like teasing this apart in that way either, even though I feel like I feel that way about it, where it's like I don't think it's empathy is the most important skill. I think it's like everything you do needs to be framed as like a productive human relationship, or like a positive human relationship. And like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Well, like all of the soft skill type stuff that people get confused by or don't want to talk about, it's like they I think one of the biggest problems that we have as leaders in the military is that they try to kind of avoid that. And I think it's not like an active avoidance, it's more like an ignorant avoidance, where like we never take the time to teach people how to be like emotionally intelligent leaders. And so like when they're confronted, especially within a military culture, because we foster this uh the idea of being like detached, indifferent leaders, right, towards these
Yeah.
uh like bots that we're going to send out to do this thing, and
Yeah.
act like the rigid rigidness sometimes of like military discipline is an excuse to not be emotionally intelligent, and it's an excuse to
Yeah.
not take care of our people because,
Yeah.
oh, you're just in the military, like shut up and color,
Yeah.
but I think I think it's emotional intelligence in its entirety that is our biggest problem, and it's like empathy is a large component of that, but it's really just building in like a inherent care for your people. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's like making it okay for me to care about them, like, and not like care about their success or their like whether or not they're promoted or qualified or whatever. It's like that's a small component of it, but like legitimately caring about them as human beings would
Yeah.
it would combat a lot of the issues we have with uh like acute mental health issues and
Yep.
suicidal ideations and attempts and military sexual trauma. It's like those are all like psychological issues. Those are like psychology based uh problems that we need to address, and it's like if we never equip our leaders with the skills to do that, we end up kind of like where we are now, where it's like you a
Yeah.
lot. And I mean, it's a way bigger problem within the military to me. Like I think this is where you start for sure, and so I think that's what they're getting at with it being the most important part. But
Yeah.
there's a lot more to, like, we have a leadership competence problem that goes far beyond emotional intelligence, and that's why I think emotional intelligence is such an elusive concept to a lot of people. That don't already have it built in by other means, is that like we have issues like people like leadership competence is such an issue, like we can't even like efficiently communicate, we can't efficiently plan and execute, we can't, like, there's a lot of stuff that I feel like we
Yep.
have problems with that are more like the fundamental building blocks of leadership. And so emotional intelligence is like, we're talking about, this is like graduate level stuff. Like this
Yep.
emotional intelligence is very nuanced and complicated. So it's like, I do think it's the most important thing as far as like a concept, like it's almost like a construct within to build all of the other leadership tools. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. It's a tough thing to it's a tough thing to teach. I think you can teach
Yeah.
it. I think people like Brene Brown are excellent resources, because they tackle things that that people without the education are going to actively avoid. Like she's a shame researcher is what she calls herself. And it's like, nobody wants not anything to do with shame. You know what I mean? But
Right.
like,
Yeah.
but a strong leader is going to explore that topic and study their own shame and like try to apply some of those tools and deal with it productively. And that way, like when you're made aware of a concept like shame and like people's shame responses to certain like experiences or situations, it's like then you're equipped to deal with that, because that's a
Yeah.
very, very powerful emotion in a person. And if you have a sailor that's super ashamed of themselves, which happens a lot because they're letting you down as a leader, or they're letting the mission
Yeah.
down or the organization down or whatever, um, it's like you need to be able to recognize that. You need to be able to help them navigate that. And it's like we're so far away from the emotional intelligence required to navigate these really like complicated leadership situations with our people that it's like, I mean, it's the most important thing, but it's like we're 7 layers removed. You know what I mean? I feel like
Yeah.
organizationally we're so far removed from achieving that. Like that's like leadership self-actualization. It's at the top of the pyramid. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like, I think it's
Yep.
incredibly important, and that's why it's at the top, but it's also like we're a ways away from that. I
Yeah.
believe.
I think I don't know. I just think it's like if I'm put it into layman's terms, if I'm a carpenter,
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I think it's situational, right? So I don't say my hammer's more important than my saw, right? I don't have the most important tool, right? Because I need them all. So to me,
Yeah.
when I read it, I'm like, empathy is one of the attributes in the leader. This is, I think, in me and power bases, this is definitely
Mm-hmm.
personal power based development. But when I look at empathy, emotional intelligence is a piece of that, right? Authenticity is a piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, being the willingness to be flexible and adjust based on the feedback you get. You got
Yeah.
listening skills in here. So I think it's one of many things. And I also think genetically people, or maybe it's not genetically, maybe not right out, pop out in the operating room. It's like, hey, I
Yeah.
have empathy. I think you're shaped over your childhood, your experiences
Yeah.
growing up shape this kind of willingness or understanding of empathy. But I know people are shaped, definitely in the military. You can be focused on process, you can be focused on results, or you can be focused on people, right? And you see it come out. Like, you can see the people that are results focused, and they kind of, it doesn't mean they don't have empathy, but their focus tends to be more towards the result at the expense of stopping
Yeah.
to consider, okay, what's the impact on people? So I think there's a lot that goes on there, but that was my kind of take. I don't know if it's the most, right. I could almost
Yeah.
say no. Communication skills are more important. You know what I mean? You can be empathetic, but if you can't communicate, you know what I mean, or
Right.
your empathy
Right.
is not going to do anything for you.
Yeah, you're for sure going to be handicapped if you don't have the other tools as well. And I've seen leaders that kind of lead with their heart on their sleeve and nothing else,
Yeah,
and it doesn't work very well. But like the people, for at least for a period of time, the people that they're in charge of, like they like, oh, this person cares about us, and that
yeah,
resonates with them. But then it's like you start to see that they're fumbling the ball constantly, because that other stuff's important too. Like my leave shit's important too. Like my
yeah,
getting my eval out on time is important too. So it's like you can't
yeah,
lose sight of the nuts and bolts and the management of people and the logistics of everything. And yeah, so it's definitely, I mean, I just think it's one of those things that you have to build into it all.
yeah,
Because when you get like lopsided towards one of those other things as well, it everything's out of whack. And so it's like
yeah,
you when you are hyper focused on productivity, it's like you start to treat people like consumables, and that's where the emotional intelligence counterweight comes in. And it's like, but I guess the way I look at it is like, it's like one of those things that should be, everything should be filtered through it for that reason. It's like, and that's why it's so important, I guess, is like you could have all the other things, and if you were stripped of emotional intelligence, I don't think any of those other things really matter. I
yeah,
think you're going to be viewed as a toxic leader. So it's like,
yeah,
but having all those other things and emotional intelligence, if you're screening everything through emotional intelligence, um, the people are going to be really well taken care of. And that is like, to me, that's the most important thing, is that they're taken care of so that they can go do the thing that we need them to do.
yeah,
It's like, I would say it's a lot more important in the military because of the stakes, like the
yeah.
consequences of not getting the mission done. It's like, that doesn't mean our profit margin goes down. That means people
Right.
die. And so it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
And I think part of the mindset too is like, and we talked about this briefly before we started recording, but
Mm,
this tendency, especially lately, kind of develop toughness and kind of prepare for the
yeah,
high end fight and kind of, I
yeah,
got it, but that's the exception, not the norm, right? So managing the day to day stresses and things like that. And frankly, people just want to be heard, I think, right? So that's a
mm,
piece of this. So at some point, and I would say early on as a young leader or just a human, I don't think
mm,
this is necessarily, this is just good people skills. The ability to kind of, when you hear someone, um, to kind of be able to understand it. In some cases, you can't
yeah,
do that, right? You might not have the experience set to do it, but definitely when you're a senior leader in the military, and you know that in the Chiefs mess, there's an
mm,
expectation that one of your roles, I think, is you represent what your people are going through, right? So if you're not
yeah,
willing to, yeah, and by the way, it changes,
should
right? So
be,
what you went through, they're not all you, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
um, and there isn't one mindset of like, hey, being in the Navy, here's your, it's not a bistable approach. It's not either,
mm,
it's not black and white. Your experience is not black and white, right? Going to sea is different for
right,
everyone. Dealing with the stresses that come with it, different. Managing a career is different for everyone. So
yeah.
um, it's just interesting. So
I think
let's talk
it's a
about.
go sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just gonna
No,
say, I
you
think it's
got
a
it. Go ahead.
tall ask for like that. The they're putting the cart before the horse a little bit with like the fighting hurt and being tough and preparing for the high end fight and all that kind
Yeah,
of those ideas of like toughness and resilience. It's like they're asking that of you, right? They're saying like, hey, we want you to be resilient in the face of the mind-bending stress that comes along with the mission that we require. But it's
yeah,
like, I think that they lose sight of the fact that these people are coming in with the understanding that it's going to be really hard. Like they're not, I
yeah,
don't think any of these kids, for whatever stupid like generational labels you want to put on them and use as an excuse for them not getting it or whatever, it's like these kids are really, really intelligent. And they're coming in the
yeah,
military fully understanding that they're going to be doing something very hard. So when you're demanding like the mission requirements and the hard working hours and the going to sea and all that kind of stuff, like they understand that that's part of the deal, right? They're going to complain and they're going to do the things that people do to cope with difficult tasks, but they understand the assignment, right? But then when we layer on top of that leadership incompetence, that it's like this modifier that compounds the casualty in a way that's
yeah,
unacceptable to these people, because that's not what they signed up for. They signed up for trusting their leaders to take care of them and do the right thing by them and help them get what they need to continue being tough and resilient in this fight. And it's not happening. And so there's
yeah,
this sense of like betrayed trust that I think is the type of thing you see like festering like in the gulf that's developed between
yeah,
like junior personnel and leadership.
yeah. And you read it in the Reddit, and you're well familiar with that.
Yeah.
So let's move towards like, all right. So let's talk about, hey, why you should care, right? As a leader, if you're in that
Mhm.
mindset like, oh, empathy, oh, that's friggin'. And by the way, this is just isn't military problem, right? Because
Yeah.
Simon Sinek is talking, right? There's an attitude in some cases in the civilian side too with bosses. I think that's a
Mhm.
part of it. People reconciling with this need to be the boss and
Yeah.
directive and get things done, and the need to, and we'll talk about that, and the need to listen and understand. So where do you see the benefits to kind of developing empathetic influence style, or this emotional intelligence, and just being able to stop for a minute, get out of get out of the relationship of things from your perspective only,
Mhm.
and to kind of work the other person's perspective into the decision making?
Why? Weirdly, so like the way I approached leadership over time, and it took me a minute to figure it out, and I'm still in this like analysis of was it the most productive way to do it because of the effect it had on me. But um, I think I went really far the other direction, like the direction that people are like towards the empathetic leadership style of like I was like, well, what do my people need? Like, that's all that matters is like taking care of their needs, figuring out where they're at. And so like it, I got really into like psychology and human relationships and meeting their needs. I'm a Maslow's hierarchy of needs guy. Like I talk about it constantly. And so it was, and the biggest reason I swung that far that direction is because I saw it working. I was
Yeah,
struggling with like getting my sailors to do the thing and respond to my leadership. And when I found that button, it worked like really well when I met their needs and took care of them and communicated authentically that like I really genuinely cared about them, even when I was being a pain in the butt and like
yeah,
and pushing them. Um, I went way out of my way to make sure they always knew that I cared about them and I was always going to be there for them. And so like I'm the
yeah,
and there's a certain expectation I think that Chiefs do these sorts of things, but I also think it feels, I don't have data, like it feels like that it has started to bleed off where like I'm showing up to their court dates and like I went over to a kid's house when he was having a domestic issue and like
yeah.
it was like a parent figure. And that's kind of the way I approached it. And like, I did it that way because it felt like it was my responsibility. Now, on the other end of that, it's very demanding. Like it's a
Yeah.
very, you're kind of polarized towards that end of the spectrum, it's like, it took a lot out of me to do that for that many people.
Yeah.
It still does, like, through the podcast in certain ways, but
Yeah.
in very,
Yeah.
the volume's turned down, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, it took big pieces out of me to do it that way. So like, I don't know that the way that I did it was balanced or whatever. Like, but
Yeah.
but I do think it's, like, a certain amount of that is like, it's absolutely necessary. It's like fundamental.
Yeah.
Back
Okay.
to kind of what we've already discussed is like, yeah,
Yeah.
you can't do leadership effectively without a component of this. Now, I had the volume maxed out. Does that mean you need to? No, but
Right.
you can't not be doing it either. Or like,
Yep.
your people aren't going to trust you. They're not going to follow you. They're not, because they think they're going to think the opposite. Like, I was very,
Yeah.
very hyper concerned with them knowing that I cared about them genuinely. You're going to be at the polar opposite of the spectrum of, they're going to think you don't care about them based
Yeah.
on demonstrated
Yeah.
behavior.
Absolutely. So they cite, I read several articles on this and kind of just my own, but like increased motivation, you get buy-in, right? Because when you start to connect with people in that way, they know you
Yeah.
care genuinely, right? They're like, all right, this person's bought into me.
Right.
That's that whole, I'll go into combat with this person, right? I'll die
Yeah,
on the
they're
hill
doing
kind
it
of thing.
for you. They're not even
Yes.
doing it for the
Yeah.
mission anymore. Yeah.
And then I think you mitigate burnout and stress, or you should help. Yeah, it should help your ability to do that, right? Because
Yeah.
back to that, we'll talk more. This kind of balance of push and pull, that's a huge piece of this, right? When to drive and when to kind of come off and take, it's that situational leadership, right? Hey, am I directing? Am I coaching? Am I supporting, kind of thing? And then I think ultimately the team sees that. I think it just increases team effectiveness too. So did you see those things?
Yeah, I'm a very, like, the reason I scoff at leadership styles is because you can't just use one, like you were saying earlier,
Right.
with the tools for, like, right tool for the job. So I'm a very individual, like, motivator type guy. Like, I'm gonna analyze the person, the individual, and figure out what motivates them individually, because everybody's different, and then I'm gonna leverage those things to push them towards doing the thing that I need them to do, right? I need you to accomplish these tasks, and there's certain ways that I'm going to interact with Sailor A that I'm not going to do with Sailor B because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So definitely different approaches, but always through that lens of emotional intelligence. Of like, I never wanted them to think that I didn't care, though there were times where, like you mentioned earlier, I was pushing that button of like authoritative influence, like, or the authoritative power. Like, I need my legitimate power tool right now to tell you to go do this thing right now with no explanation, with no nothing. But the reason why they're willing to do that, and it doesn't harm my my like credibility and trust with them, is that I've built up over time a rapport and a trust with them, that I have their best interests at heart, that I care about them, that I'm not going to put them in a situation that's going to harm them in any way, or that, like, one of the probably default assumptions by junior sailors sometimes when they're given that type of direction is that, like, oh, chief just doesn't care about me and wants me to, like, basically, like, that you're not filtering it through that lens. And that chief's a big idiot because this isn't the most efficient way of doing this thing, or this doesn't make any sense, or that the fact that we're even doing this today is stupid for at whatever reason. And it's like, when you build up that trust and credibility with your people, it's like, they're not thinking that. Like, because I've demonstrated to them over time that I am thinking about those things. And so they give you the benefit of the doubt. And it's like, okay, chief knows something I don't know. And that's usually true. And the way that I would reinforce that and validate their feelings on a consistent basis, so that next time they would trust me too, is when I give them that type of direction, I then loop back around when I have time and I'm like,
Yep.
hey, sorry to do that to you, but this is what was going on. And this is why I need you to go do that thing right now, and couldn't explain it to you.
Yep.
So that,
So
again, just to
that's,
validate the feeling that they had,
yeah,
that like, yep, Chief's
absolutely.
thinking about me and how this affects me.
Yeah, because to your point, right, there's going to be times when I have to be directive, right? There's a short
Yeah.
notice thing, there's an emergency, right? But again, there is a time to come back again,
Yep.
and that's that empathetic connection. Hey, I got it. I'm sure you're frustrated and pissed off. Here's what I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I think part of this too, we're talking this from leadership. This is a followership skill too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they need to understand and start to learn, like, if I'm going to understand your feelings and I have experience and can consider those, flip it, right? You need to understand,
Mm-hmm.
to your point, like,
Yeah.
hey, why is Chief acting this way, right? So
Yeah.
he or she might be getting pressure, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think when you start to teach, from a followership perspective, this kind of,
Yeah.
do you understand my perspective too? Let me teach you, because in the future you're
Yeah.
going to be in this position, right? Kind of thing.
I think it's like, I think it's important to teach um juniors so that they understand what's like the interaction that's happening, but also like, even if you haven't, like, because like, let's be honest, like, that's, I mean, they, with the NLEC ELD courses, like, I'm sure they it comes up in discussion a little bit, but for junior people, it's like, it's that the old adage of like, they don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And it's like,
Yeah.
they're interpreting those things, it like, in absence of the tools for just cognitive understanding, right, or being taught these things. It's like, they're just gonna go based on how it makes them feel. And it's like, there's a good and bad component to that. Like, the bad being, I wish they understood it. It would make it a lot simpler, and it, it's like building the foundation for them to be my relief in the future. But it's very
Yeah.
much a leadership skill anyway. But like, it's good in that, like, it's simple, and it's not something you don't need to teach them how to like perceive that you care about them. And that's what's so
Yep.
interesting about it, is it's like, it's emotive in a way that, like, I don't really need to explain it. If I'm taking care of them, and this is what's cool about, like, I hear people talk about like transformational leaders and all this, like what their ideal
Yeah.
leader would be or whatever. And it's like, what's super interesting about it is like you and I are very different personalities, right? But I know that you are an effective leader. Like, I can tell, and that you care about your people too. You're not going to express it the same way that I probably do, but like, it's
Right.
going to get across to your people no matter what, because there's this thing that happens. Like, it's just the
Yeah.
human experience where it's like, these people just understand how their leadership makes them feel. So you get to see like these wildly varying flavors of leaders that have different personalities and characteristics. And so they look very different, but they're applying the same tools and
Yeah.
making the people feel the same way. And it's like, it's not really a thing. Like, it certainly helps if they understand it like intellectually, but like, they're just going to go based on how it makes them feel. And that, like,
Yep.
understanding that like, is really important, because you can start to leverage that as a way to motivate your people to do the thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't think that, while I do think there's a lot of value to them understanding it and being taught it, like, academically, I don't think it's necessary to
Yeah.
accomplish the same thing, because, like, you're just treating a human being like
Yeah.
well, in a human relationship at its simplest level, and it's like, they're going to respond accordingly.
Okay. So I would say, like, it's learned over time, this emotional, intelligence and things like that. So
Yeah.
for whatever reason, I remember even as a young kid, like, I had friends and all that got it, but I was always very process and results motivated, right? Like, kind of
Yeah.
want to get a job and do that, right? So
Yeah.
and to me, often, it took me a while to start to think and cue in on the impact on the people and consider those kind of things.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to talk about what it kind of looks like and sounds like, right? So I think that's a piece of it. Like, if I'm a leader and I think empathy is being weak or whatever, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
whatever the perspective is. So walk me how you think through, give an example, like what would empathetic leadership sound like, um, individually or with the team.
I mean, it's for me, it's behavioral. I've always talked about leadership by example being the most powerful like leadership tool I've ever seen in real life, where like I say a lot of things on this podcast, and it seems based on the response and communications with listeners that it's making an impact, it's helping a lot of people, but the way that it helps is they're applying it in real life, right? So they're doing it and their people are responding to it. And so like the me saying it is great. Like I can say all the right things and present as a strong leader. And I've met people like this where it's like that on the surface, people think that they're great leaders because they're charismatic and they're articulate and they're squared away looking and stuff like that. But then in
Yeah.
practical application, some of the guys that you would judge on the surface as not that are the vastly more effective leaders. And it's, for me, it boils down to being able to behave in a way that communicates authentic, like I authentically care about you.
Right.
And it's a lot of things. At risk of going on a huge monologue and talking in circles, I'm just going to give like a specific example. So the
Yes.
one of the ways that I would do it is, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, is drink runs, right? It sounds stupid, but we would get into these situations where, like on a 2-crew ballistic missile submarine, they would inevitably try to cram the food load into like a day and a half, which is absurd. It's like the only way you're going to get that done efficiently, like if you're doing it right, is like you're going to be working like 18-hour days. It was always insane. I was showing up early, doing all the normal chief things, the meetings, the normal daily routine stuff, supervising all the meals and all the other things. And then we would start loading food later on. And I'd be at work until 1 a.m. And somewhere in there, people, you can feel it in the air. Like it starts to get to this like point where the stress is like boiling over. Like people are having a hard time staying engaged. They're getting frustrated and just beat down. Right. And everybody's tired too, including me. Cause usually I would bring my guys in later, but they're still working rough, like 12-hour days. So when I started to feel that coming on, either me or my supply officer, because we weren't always in the thick of it, because I'm supervising and my supply officer's doing department head things on the submarine still, and then coming in and checking on us. And she was great. She always wanted to help. And so she, either her or I would go, hey, we'll be right back. And we'd jump in our cars, go up to upper base and go to the mini mart and just fill a bag with everybody's favorite energy drink or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Or like sometimes she would run to like McDonald's and just come back with a sack of burgers and fries. And out of her pocket or my pocket, right? Like they're not paying for the stuff. They didn't ask for it, right? But it's like it's like I'm there with them. I'm debloused. I'm carrying boxes. I'm doing the thing right there with them. But that's a component of it. I'm not in the Chiefs quarters like sitting with my feet up. And,
yes.
But also I am in a supervisory role. Like I'm not like strictly a worker bee in this scenario, but if that's the most effective thing I can do, then I'm moving boxes. But I got to run around and make sure the thing is still happening the way it's supposed to. But then the drink run thing, it's like coming back with like it diffuses so much tension. You feel the energy in the room change when you're handing out because they're just like, oh, thank God. You know what I mean? Like just a moment of respite in this hellscape that is a food load in that type of a scenario. And so it's just like, it's a huge deal to them. And if you think about it, it's like, it's a very insignificant gesture on its surface, like, I mean, I went and spent $20 on some, like, who cares? Like, that's
Yeah.
not a big deal. But to them, it's the gesture is a huge deal. The communication that I care about them, that I'm right here with them. It's like a reminder in that moment that, like, we're all in this together. I love you all, and we're going to get through
Yep.
this. I know it sucks, but just keep pushing, you know? And it's like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff goes a really, really, really long way. And there's
Yeah.
plenty of opportunity to do things like that. Just little moments, like I used to cut guys out a little early when we're in port and there's nothing going on, because I know those days are going to come where we're doing those food loads. Like if there's nothing going on in the middle of a refit period or whatever, where we're just in port and all I got, the most important thing I got to get done today is lunch, you know, then it's like
Yeah.
after lunch, it's like, hey, don't you have a dental appointment? Wink, you know, like get out of here,
Yep.
you know, and I'll send a guy home early. Like I'll send somebody out of there at like 1300. And so just things like that, like reading the landscape and understanding that like nobody needs to be here until 1700 except for me. Like I'm the
Yeah.
chief, I'm wearing the khaki belt, I'm the one getting paid more. So like I'll be here for the meetings and I'll be here for all the other stuff, but my whole division being here, like it doesn't, like, because
Yeah.
after lunch cleanup's done, they're standing around staring at each other largely, unless we have something going on, and that's different. And I
Yep.
brief that in the morning and I make sure that I have the people there that I need. But if I don't need everybody, it's like, okay, you can leave and you can leave. You had duty yesterday, get out of here, that kind of thing. It's just like not losing sight of those types of things. And if it pervades everything you do, if you get to the point where all of your action is filtered through that emotional intelligence lens, it's like those types of things kind of handle themselves. And so it's like,
Yeah.
for me, it's very behavioral based. Like it needs to be
Yeah.
woven into all of your behaviors. And there are times where the decision making matrix is going to marginalize that a little bit, where it's like, yes, I considered it, but I understood that in order to do this thing that's required, I'm going to have to kind of push the concerns about you aside and like spend a little bit of that capital that I've
Yeah.
accrued, right? But then
Yeah.
there's other times that it's like that's going to be the primary thing, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm going to get you out of here as soon as possible and whatever. So
Yeah. I think it's founded in your own experience too, right? So if to your
sure,
point about
yeah,
working party, right? If you've never been involved in a working party and now you're in charge of one, right? You're not going to
yeah,
understand the frustration, um, the mental and physical energy that goes into that.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean you can't be an empathetic leader, right? That's when you
right,
got to really pause and go, okay, let me just take time and kind of, this is a big evolution, whatever it is, or this is a big planning event. I've never done it. Maybe there's something similar I've been through, right? Like
yeah,
that could be like this, or you engage your team, and like, all right, how you guys thinking through this?
yep.
What do I need to be thinking about? You know what I mean? Just a kind of pre-brief
And
thing.
even that part, that thing you just said is so important, the engaging your team part. Like
Yeah,
that's a component of it, like being willing to have a conversation where they have input and they subsequently have ownership in whatever decision is made as a result, because chief asked me how, like, my opinion. It's like
yeah,
that's a huge thing that like a lot of leaders don't leverage, at least not like regularly. And it's an enormous component of it, because like when you allow them to be part of the planning process, or you allow their inputs to shape
yep,
whatever the plan to attack this assignment is, then yeah, like they
yep,
get a ton of buy-in and they feel heard and they feel
yep,
valued, and that's all, yeah, that's all a
yep.
big
And I'm
component of it.
absolutely. And then it helps you, like, so back a little bit to frameworks, but you know, understanding how they're feeling helps you
Mm,
back to influence tactics, right? So, hey, maybe they need a little, this isn't time to be coercive in your influence tactic. This is
right.
time, or shut the F up kind of
Yeah.
leadership, right? Do as I say. Maybe it's time to like,
Mm,
all right, hey guys, I've been there. I know this sucks. Let's get
mm,
this done. Maybe it's a this for that. Hey, we're going to stay late now. I got you on the back end, right?
yeah.
So I'm going to give you some time, or, um, just an inspirational appeal. Getting those
Mm,
pizzas and those sodas is kind of an
mm,
inspirational appeal, like without
yeah.
saying anything, like, hey, I'm
Right.
with you. I got you. And then just
Yep.
your presence there, right, is huge. So,
Mm,
because a part of that, it's not just the working parties suck because they're hard work and they're long hours. It's
Yeah.
when they see their leadership, who, by the way, eats the food and drinks all the
Yep.
stuff that we're loading on,
Yep.
there's that
Yep.
immediate disconnect. So the power of
Yeah.
the wardroom and the chief's mess coming together
Mm-hmm.
for those events, right? All
Yeah.
hands means all hands in the case of Navy. That's how empathy, like, holy shit. Imagine how we could go if we know they're already feeling like, oh yeah, chiefs and officers are exempt from this, but what are you going to
Yeah.
do about it, right? So you could really
Right.
adjust some things. So,
My
um,
supply officer, I had to try to kick her off the submarine. Like she would not leave until the food load was done. And she like,
yeah,
like what's she really doing? I mean, she got to a point where like towards the end, she was trying to like help hump boxes and stuff. But
yeah,
it's like, cause she had all this other stuff she had to do. So she couldn't be there as much as I was. I was there, but she was always there and
yeah.
she was always involved. So yeah, it meant a lot to those guys.
Yeah. And then I think there's the point we brought it up. There's the emotion, there's the post event kind of empathy approach, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
crap, we've done this with, if you're a parent of kids, this happens all the time, right? You get pissed off at the heat of the moment. You just,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
frustrated and you go at them and then you calm down afterwards. And that's
Yeah.
when you have to huddle and go, all right, hey, I know it went high and right,
Yep.
but what I mean? Just understand, and you have a
Yeah.
conversation. Um,
And I'm
and you,
guilty of that for
yeah, we
sure.
all
Like
are. We're all human.
yeah.
I mean,
Well,
everyone does
sometimes
it.
I feel compelled to say it when we get to points like this because I feel like there are listeners who think that I'm some like exemplar of leadership all the time, and it's like I try to be, but like
Yeah.
there's for sure a bunch of times, especially like I had a really hard time dealing with deployments, like like managing my mood during deployments is probably a better way of saying it because it
Yeah.
was just like I was miserable. I wasn't sleeping well. I had all these issues that were all like undiagnosed, and I was just like pumping myself full of caffeine and willpower my
Yeah.
way through it. And it's just like, yeah, I had a bunch of moments where I would do that, and then I'd have to come back and be like, oh, dude, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
I
And I
didn't
think a piece of it, yeah,
had
too,
nothing to do with
is
you, you know?
I know. But I'm telling you, if you're not human, if that doesn't happen, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you are a bot if you don't go
Yeah.
through those kind of emotional swings.
Yeah.
But I think I've written about this before, right? What are the assumptions you have about people, right? So that kind of shifts it too, right? And
Mm-hmm.
kind of your assumption as your role as a leader. So just thinking through
Yeah.
that. All right, so let's jump on. And we talked about this. So I like to always do, the opposites too. So the opposite of
Mm-hmm.
empathy would be stuff like disdain, indifference,
Yeah.
apathy, like and those things don't sound good or productive, right?
Yeah.
But is there a time like when indifference has a role in leadership?
um so this was like we talked a little before we recorded. This was like one of my favorite questions because it's like it gives me pause where I'm like, my first reaction is I think something adjacent does. Like I don't know if indifference is the best word, but like a
Yeah,
detachment for sure. Like it's like I'm a big Jocko Willink extreme ownership fan, and that he talks about detachment, and it's more like without getting like tunnel vision because you're in it and you're doing it. It's like being able to detach, back up, read the whole situation, and process all of that to make a better decision, because there's things you're not going to see if you don't have the ability to kind of remove yourself from the situation, back up a little bit, really see what's going on. For me, I had issues like I would find myself with my foot in my mouth a lot. Like I would make assumptions that based on my experience, I knew what had happened, and would start like reacting as if this assumed interpretation of an event was true, and then I would find out that it wasn't, and like that I was missing a component of it, and my reaction was unwarranted as a result, right? So I had to stop doing that and take the time to
yeah,
ask more questions and get the full context of the situation. And so I think because like a sailor runs up to you out of breath and is like, chief, oh my God, this just happened and we need you right now. And then you get down there with that in your mind, thinking that's exactly what happened. And then you find out that's not what happened. This is that sailor taking that snapshot and thinking that they understand it without asking any questions as well. And so it's easy to react that way because you just think you go into it with like an honest intention of dealing with the situation that you perceive to exist, but that's not real. Like that's not what happened. You got to stop and ask questions. And so I would say that moment of pause before you take action, that detachment, is really important. And then there probably is a component, and I would say it probably falls under the umbrella almost of like professionalism, in that there's a certain level of indifference towards, and again, indifference feels like the not quite the right shaped peg for the hole, like, but like a degree of separation that needs to be maintained in order to have an effective like leader follower relationship, right? So we're not operating in the gray area of fraternization and stuff, like, and that's a tough thing to manage when you are getting to a point where, like the other night, like, so I had a couple of guys when I was on Jimmy Carter. They've long been out of the Navy. They're in their 30s now, and they came over to the house, like, brought their wives, like we had dinner and drank and were merry, right? But I'm an old retired guy now, and they've been out of the Navy for a decade, so it's like we're friends now, and that's not weird to me because they meant so much to me. It's like my kids are coming to visit, like it's like we're having dinner at Dad's house, but also, like, had I done that as their chief, that would have been super on the wrong side of that line. I can't do those types of things because at that moment I was their boss, and I needed to be able to assert certain power bases and to get them to do the thing and to hold them accountable and all that kind of stuff. And with all that removed, I can have this type of a relationship where it's like, I love them, like they're important people to me, but it's like, it's a separation that needs to be maintained, because even though like I have love in my heart for every sailor I've ever led, and I can look at them and be like, man, that person is really important to me, without crossing. But I need to like hold myself back from the type of relationship I now have with those two sailors, that are like, because that component of the relationship is removed, where I'm no longer in charge of them. They no longer answer me. So I think there's a place for something adjacent for sure. I don't think indifference is and I'm focusing in on that one because I think disdain is obviously not, like,
we don't have disdain, apathy.
Yeah, so like I have disdain for certain things, but it's not people, like,
right.
So I guess like I definitely have like those emotions in my repertoire, but it's for like people harming the people I'm charged with leading, or like somebody doing something that harms them or removes some type of need or whatever. But it's
introduces
like
barriers to performance.
So I think, but as far as the indifference goes, I think something adjacent is definitely present, but
Okay. I think it's the risk of, like I said, the people that can be more focused on results, process and things like, and don't have that people component built up as much. I think they could tend to focus more towards, I don't think it's deliberate indifference, but it could be like, hey, we're just going to go down this road and get things done.
I think it's like a polarization, kind of like how I went. I probably swung too far towards the like empathetic style. God, I fucking hate that word. The empathetic like approach, but it's and I know what you mean exactly. Like 1120s in the submarine force, like the nuclear engineering style officers. A lot of them are very, very like process and procedure and spreadsheet screen and all that kind of stuff. And they very much lack this approach, and it doesn't work. And I think I think most people, it's like either that or just general run-of-the-mill leadership and competence are the reasons why they don't have empathy and emotional intelligence built into their leadership approach. But I do think that like it's the biggest problem we have is that like those people that are very procedural and process based, it's like they're leaning way too hard in that direction because they think that's the whole thing, because
Yeah.
they've never been educated otherwise. And so,
Yep.
and even when it's not like they've never heard of emotional intelligence, they just think it's
Yep.
like some touchy feely Brene Brown Netflix thing. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, that's
Yep.
human relationships, and
Yeah.
it's important.
So back to one of the roles of the chief, right? This is part, training and educating your young officer that you're, your division officer, department head, right? That's a piece of this, right? Because you have years and years and years of, I've been there, done that.
Yep.
They don't. They're making these decisions. They may come in, like you said, very cerebral or not, definitely with no kind of concept of what it takes to get things done, right? So it's not just, hey, here's how you do maintenance schedules and go get your warfare pin. It's like, hey, let's talk about how to be a person who really relates to and understands people. I think one time where I could use indifference, right, is when I'm trying to mitigate some shit stir, right? The troublemaker who's trying to pull my strings in front of people, right? You've seen that, right?
Yeah.
They'll verbally push back. It's like, yeah, I'm not even going to acknowledge that, right? Kind of,
Right. Yeah.
being,
That's
like,
fair.
no, you're not going to get
Yeah.
me to, I'm not going to hook into that, right?
That's a good,
because everyone's watching,
I had to develop that callus for the dumb cook stereotype, and there were times that I chose to clap back, like where it felt appropriate to defend myself, and I probably did that too much. But I think I don't think I ever got great at it, but I definitely needed to learn there was a time and a place to push back on those types of things. So I think that's a really good example
and
of like,
and it may be, hey, I'm going to show indifference in front of the group, but I'm still going to circle back and go, hey, I get your point, but you know what I mean? We have that conversation about time and place and followership and things like that.
Right.
And I had to learn this. Like I was like, as command master chief, I remember, you're in this situation where you're trying to mitigate and be this, the go between many things, right? So there was a frustration I had once about, why don't the chiefs? I was venting my CO because you do that. It's not just a CO venting to you. Usually in those relationships, you're venting back and forth. It's like, I don't understand how they don't know this. And he's like, Paul, they're not all you, right? So that is a key mantra in my head of like, they're not all me. So that kind of thinking forced me to go, okay, the way I would do it is not the way everyone else would do it,
Yeah. Well, not only that, but like your ability to process information and understand it quickly or whatever, like the realization that my context and experience is not everybody's context and experience, as obvious as that sounds. It's like you really gotta beat that into your cognitive process when you're trying to figure out these people and figure out what they need and what's going to motivate them to do the thing and what's going to help them develop in the best way possible. It's like, it took me a while to really build that into my process, and that whole like realizing everybody's different and everybody's going to be motivated differently. And so I can't treat them all the same, which is why leadership styles are BS. And so it's like, you don't get to just approach it one way. Like you need to figure these people out and figure out what they need and then apply those leadership tools as needed situationally. And it's like, they're not me. Like, and there are times where like I've had sailors, I'm a big, like there's no such thing as a lost cause. Like if somebody washes out, it's my leadership failure. So, that was very instructional for me of like, I pick things up quick and I process information quick and I can think on my feet and I can do a lot of like, I did well in school. Like I'm what you would call intelligent, I guess, but there are people that they're not dumb and they're not useless and they're definitely not hopeless, but you have to like just crack the code, like you have to figure out what do they know and what don't they know? Like what is their context and experience? So where are the holes? Like what are the things that are holding them back from like responding to my leadership and doing the thing? And it's like, to me, that's like the highest form of like leadership responsibility of like, and it's like the stuff that I enjoy the most, honestly, is like that challenge of like, in a weird way, like those kids that everybody had written off as lost causes. I was just like,
Yeah.
yes, like come to me, let
Yeah.
me do it. And I didn't always win, like I've got some
Yeah.
failures, but yeah, it was like I wanted to be the one that cracked the code in a selfish kind of way, almost like yeah, I definitely empathized and wanted to like help them succeed, and that was like the highest form of achievement, was like if I could turn somebody like that around, like, and have the
Yeah.
success story, which I got to do a few times, and I mean, those are some of the most rewarding things I've ever done, man. And like
Yeah.
I tell those stories often. Like, it's figuring out that they're not you is it cracks open this whole other like frontier of leadership that a lot of people, I don't even think a lot of people ever get to, and it's so
No.
cool and so rewarding.
Yeah. And in military circles, particularly where we define worth by uniform, this is where I'm like,
Yeah.
no, the uniform doesn't define the person. The person defines
Right.
the uniform.
Right.
And then you can, again, so I got it. We're talking about heavily leading down, but
Mm.
leading across with your peers and leading up, right? So understanding they're not all you too.
Yep.
So as you're quick to
Yep.
criticize, but also like being able to ask questions like, hey, if I was in their position, what would I be thinking or feeling right
Right.
now? Or
Right.
um, that is a good
Yep.
thing for any person at any point in their career to be thinking
Yeah.
about. It's like, all right, again, look it up. Hey,
Yeah.
my
Understanding
boss,
my
my parent, my
leadership. Yep.
spouse
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
pissed off, right?
Yeah.
So, what would they be thinking now? So I've seen a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh shit, something I said that I don't think is
Yeah.
wrong has pissed someone off or made them upset, right? So
Yeah.
what are they thinking? And if you don't know, that should tee up an immediate follow-up engagement. Like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
sorry that I didn't mean
Ask.
to
Yeah.
upset you here. Ask, like, and you
Ask the
will get the
question.
perspective. Yes, and
Yeah.
then your
Yeah.
perspective base will grow. So,
Yeah. Yep.
so I think those are good things to do. Um, I was going to ask that, but I think we'll go to. So let's talk about. We talked about attributes early on, but I want to kind of dial on a couple other ones. So,
Okay.
so I think other things like active listening, humility, and authenticity. Those are terms you kind of
Mm.
hear throughout. Definitely in the cheese smash, you hear this. Oh, humble leaders, and I've heard a lot about authentic leaders. So how does that? Why are those so important?
You said active listening, something, and authenticity. What was the second one?
Humility. Yep.
Humility. Okay.
Humility. Yep.
Um, for me, it's it all, like, I always have like one thing, like, so I talk a lot about like leadership development education. Like, I trace all the problems back to deficiencies in leadership competence. So like for
Yep.
me, like the stuff like this, the importance that it has, like I pull the thread and I always arrive at trust, like every time. It's, for me, if your sailors don't trust you, they're not going to follow you. They, like, it goes back to that belief that you have their best interests at heart and you care about them. And so like authenticity is a way of doing that, like a way of achieving it. And I think it's the best way of like instilling in a person that you actually do believe those things and have those feelings, right? Like, I really do care about you and you really can trust me and I really do have your best interests at heart. It's like the only way for me to achieve trust is through like an authentic leadership interaction. And there's a lot of like, when you see the rampant leadership incompetence in the military, and I say it that way on purpose because I want it to feel cutting. Even though it's
Yeah.
not a swipe, like it's not an insult, it should cut. It
You
cuts
want to
me when I
stick.
say it. It hurts me a
Yeah.
little bit every time I say it.
Yeah.
But the rampant leadership incompetence that we have, what you find as like a coping mechanism for the people who are in those positions, because 99% of the time, those people who are incompetent leaders, and again, not an insult, just a statement of status, really, is they do care, right? Like 99% of the time, those people genuinely care, and they really do want you to trust them, and they really do have your best interests at heart. They just don't have the tools to communicate that and to achieve the trust that they need from you in order to motivate you to do the thing. And then a lot of times the relationship between the two, based on a lack of trust, deteriorates. And so then they think of you as an adversary, and then maybe you think of them as an adversary, because that, like, over time, that leadership and competence festers, and you have chiefs that start to develop this adversarial relationship with junior sailors where they're viewed as like the other team or like the enemy almost. And you get into these weird interactions where it's like you got chiefs blaming the junior sailors for sucking, and it's like, that's your job, dude. Like, you need to get them to respond. That's your whole job. And so I think trust is just like the most important thing. And the way that you achieve that is through authenticity. I think you could build humility into that as like a component of authenticity. But yeah, you're not going to achieve trust without authenticity. And that authenticity can present itself in many ways, right? Like going back to the wildly varying like types of leaders that we have. This guy, Paul, ironically, like his name was Paul. He was a missile tech senior chief on my last submarine. And this dude, very quiet, unassuming dude, not like, and I don't want to, just in case he ever listens to this, like, I love Paul to death. He's a great dude.
Yeah.
Not like he doesn't look the part. He doesn't sound the part, like he's not, like I had a CMC named Gabe, that, I mean, looked like a superhero. Like he was a CrossFit athlete, just looks like a live action Buzz Lightyear, just like he just looks the part, you know what I mean? And he sounds it, deep booming voice, very articulate, great leader, mentor to this day. I love that dude. Paul was on the polar opposite of that spectrum. He was like a little softer on the middle, going bald, like just didn't look the part, not a great speaker. Even when he would get in front of a group, so we'd be at like Quarters on the Pier or something, he would he sounded nervous all the time. Like he would stutter a little bit maybe, but his people would follow him through the gates of hell. Like he was such a great leader. They loved him. And they knew that if he thought it was in their best interest, he would lay down in traffic for them. And so it was like to watch a dude like that achieve that level of like reverence with his people. It was just like, it was impressive to watch. And it illuminates that point to me a lot of like, he just was authentically himself. Like he wasn't trying to be Gabe or me, right? Like he was just being himself. And all he cared about was taking care of his people. And the way in which he communicated that authenticity was just being himself and just like taking any action that communicates through action. And that's the important part of it, that you genuinely care about them, is going to communicate. It's going to make them feel like you care about them. And that creates an environment where trust can grow. And so it's like, you don't need to look the part. You don't need to sound the part. You don't need to be what people would call a transformational leader in the traditional sense, where you're envisioning like this Tony Robbins figure on stage or Jocko Willink or whatever. It's you can be exactly who you are and be an authentic leader who can very effectively communicate to his people that they can trust you and that you have their best interests at heart and that you care about them. And to me, that's what like authenticity is all about, is building trust, for sure.
Absolutely. Cool. All right, man. So I think we'll wrap it. I think we talked through a lot of stuff here. There's a lot for people to unpack as they're listening. So
for sure,
any
man.
Kind of any final thoughts or recommendations?
Just the like, I think emotional intelligence, like that's the thing that's missing a lot. It's a weird one, because it's like, I want to say it's an advanced leadership competence that comes after a lot of more fundamental things. But at the same time, I think it's foundational in a weird way. Like I almost want you to build all of your leadership tools on top of emotional intelligence so that it is woven into everything. So it's this weird, like, circular logic that I have about it, where I feel like it's always a good thing to build it in. And I think you can have a revelation if you take the time to study this, where maybe you do have a bunch of the tools and you're great at process improvement and managing like the production side of things. But you haven't achieved an emotional intelligence competence. And when you do, you can then retroactively apply it to all those things. So I think that's kind of like why the circular logic works, is like, you can retroactively apply it and start to view everything through that lens after the fact. But I think it's also a very good thing to take the time to understand these things prior to becoming a leader. Even it'll make you a better follower. It'll make your leadership interactions a lot more productive, because you'll start to understand what your leader is doing and why. And even if that leader is incompetent, like you're gonna have a lot more like empathy, or like sympathy and empathy for your leader who is struggling with leadership competence. And it hopefully will help stave off some of that adversarial tension that can develop. And so I think that everybody's exploration of emotional intelligence is really important. And one of my favorite resources is Brene Brown. And if you're not into books and stuff, like, she's got some stuff on Netflix. She's got a podcast. So there's a TED Talk that is kind of how she blew up on. I mean, she probably has more than one by now, but on YouTube. And so it's a great resource to start to understand a lot of this stuff, because it's so important. And I think a lot of people shy away from it as like touchy feely, or like, and it's like it's such a fundamental misunderstanding of just people by thinking about it that way, and kind of being turned off by it, because it's the touchy feely side of leadership. It's like, okay, like, you can feel that way, but that's why your leadership is ineffective. So
I would say, like, if you're not doing it, if you're hesitant, or you think it's touchy feely, like, hey, it doesn't mean you need to go around hugging everybody, but just try it, right? Open it up, try some of the things we've offered. And I guarantee, right, if you don't have empathy, you'll know the results. But if you do, you're going to start to see change in your people and teams. So,
and a small amount, like you were like, you mentioned, like, it's not your hardwiring, right? Where it's like, I probably am more, I leaned towards that already, just because of how I was raised and my personality and stuff. But even a small amount built, like, if you're like, let's say you're devoid of it somehow, like you're a robot, right? If you're a 10% increase is going to be a market improvement in your leadership overall, like your leadership efficacy. So it's like, it's not, you're like you said, you don't need to be going around hugging everybody. Like, just like, you don't need to do it the way that I did, where I leaned more into it, because I just felt like it was the right way to do things. But part of it is, that's my personality. Like, I have a hard time not being a hugger. You know what I mean? So it's like, I want to just and so, but you don't need to be that. You can be the opposite end of the spectrum as me. As long as you have some of it, it's going to make you a wildly more efficient leader.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again. It's great seeing you. And just for my listeners, kind of, where can they find your stuff? Because I know you're building out in the video space now. You got, I think, YouTube
dude,
and things like that.
So
what's going on?
I mean, we're both going to publish this, so they'll see it there too. But so I'm, you can find us at dgutspodcast.com. Anywhere you get podcasts, you just search Don't Give Up Shit Podcast. But then we're on YouTube now. I was struggling for a while with my video setup and learning how to edit videos efficiently. But I'm starting to catch back up. I've been, the last 2 episodes, I've gotten the YouTube video up approximately when the podcast publishes. So I've got some like 4, I think 4 videos that I still need to edit from before and get up. But they're up on YouTube now. We're on Patreon. We're on Discord, talking and like doing all kinds of stuff. So we're all over the place. But those are the primary ways to find us.
Okay. So. And I'll put that in the episode description too. So, but keep up the great work. The advocacy, I mean, again, like we talked about, right? At some point we're not going to be able to do this. So this inspiring other people to come behind and continue these conversations. For sure. I think it's really important. So thanks again for your time. It's been great to see you.
Ditto. Yeah, it was good talking, man. This was fun. It's been a while. All right, I hope you all enjoyed that. It's always so much fun talking to Paul, and just like he's one of the few people I think that like he keeps up with me, and he like pushes me, and we have different views on some things. So like, it's fun to like have a lighthearted debate about some of this stuff, and but we do agree on a lot as well, and he brings up new ideas and is willing to go down the rabbit hole with me, and it has just as much fun doing it. So it's always great talking to Paul. If you haven't already, go check out his podcast, Cutlass Podcast. It's awesome. He talks to a lot of really cool people. It's shorter than mine. Don't worry. Like he usually aims for around 30-40 minutes for his podcast, so that they're much more digestible. Just great dude. Always fun to have him on. As always, if you need anything from us, hit us up. don'tgiveupptheshitpodcast@gmail.com. You can Facebook message us, Don't Give Up the Shit Podcast, or you can DM us on Instagram, Reddit, or Discord at DGUTSpodcast. If you want to support us, you can go to dgutspodcast.com. There's a donate button on the website. You can also click the shop button or just go to dgutsapparel.com. Get yourself some Naval Pride and Heritage gear you'll actually wear in public. We got stickers, coins, all the things are there. And then probably the best way to support us is patreon.com/dgutspodcast. We have 5 tiers. Whichever one fits you, just pick one. I don't care. I'm just happy that people are willing to support, and it helps us pay the bills and expand the platform. So if you can and you're willing, please go to patreon.com/dgutspodcast and become a patron today. And then if you can't or aren't quite willing, if I haven't got to you yet, to spend the money, I understand. It is what it is. We're just happy you're here. So if you want to support us in a non-monetary way, just share the content, like the content, review us, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share the videos, share the podcast, tag your friends, whatever's easiest. It all helps. It all supports us. And so we really appreciate your willingness to do anything to support us, including just listening. And that's it. That's what I got for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and don't give up the ship. Hey, shout out to our level 5 patrons, Victoria Livingood and William McIver. We really appreciate you. All our other patrons, you're enabling us to do this thing, and your support means everything. Thank you. Please hit the like button, drop a comment down below on what you thought, and subscribe to the channel.